welcome to this week's episode of the Marina Perry Podcast. What a treat I have in store for you this week. I am very, very excited. I have my beautiful daughter, Harlow Perry as a guest on the show, and I have never had a family member, let me just think about that, not a formal blood family member anyway, have I, as a guest on the show. And the reason, as we'll share in this episode, Harlow is on the show, is she went through quite a unique experience last year, and we wanted to share some of that with you because some of you know Harlow literally from real life. I know many of the listeners and followers in my community have known Harlow since she was a little girl, and also even those of you just following along on social media. I'm not a parent who has ever hid my children's faces from the camera. My family is very much on show. So, you know, what happens in this modern era is we sometimes feel like we know people. So we wanted to share Harlow's story. Specifically, I wanted to hear from her learnings and her lessons. And I feel so much of the through line or the takeaways will be relevant to all of us. So my darling Harlow, thank you so much for being on the episode with me today.
Thank you.
Are you excited to be here?
Yeah, I'm excited. Bit nervous.
Bit nervous, yes, you are. And as I said to you before we started, don't worry about it. As I start every podcast, one of the key things I remind myself of is that it's really not about me and it's not about performing or achieving anything, but really rather coming from that place of service. And I know that you are down for that. So, as a guest on the podcast, Harlow, can you please share with us what would be the animal that best represents you and why?
I've thought about this and I think it might be a meerkat.
Yes.
Because they're very quick on their feet. They're also quite intelligent, and they also have a little bit of anxious energy, which I will admit that I have.
A little bit, they can be a little high strung.
Yeah.
And I feel like they're also very curious and social creatures. I actually don't know a lot about a meerkat, but I get the energy and I would agree. As your mother, I would agree. That's cute though. They're also adorable.
Yeah.
And then Harlow, what would be the superpower that you would choose to have and why?
Initially I would have said being able to read people's minds, but with everything going on in the world right now, I'd probably say teleportation, because I could go anywhere in the world and I would get an extra hour of sleep because I wouldn't have to go to school early.
You could just teleport yourself there. Well, I think it's adorable that you're still planning on teleporting yourself to school. That's cool, because you could have chosen not to. Okay, very good. So for the listeners now who don't know about you in general, why don't we, even before last year, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself. What would you think is relevant if you were going to share who you are and your life, and what would you say?
I've always loved learning.
Yes.
One of my favourite things to do is read. I've always loved a good story.
You do love stories. You read more than anybody I know, actually.
Potatoes are a really big part of my personality.
You do love potatoes. This is true. A lot.
Obviously, this is my mum, Marina, and my dad, Todd. They are divorced, and I have a little sister, Bayla, and I live here in like a not conventional house, but I love it because it helps expand my community and the love I feel and give and receive. And
in this home, yes, that's true with us.
And then I have stepbrothers, and my dad has a partner at my mum's house.
Yeah, so you are a child of divorce, that's true.
Mixed family.
A blended family,
Yes,
that's true. Blended family. And you are very much a bookworm, and you are very smart, and you do like potatoes. So well done. I would agree.
That's me.
That's you in a nutshell. And you're also very, very intuitive and very wise. You've always been a wise soul, and you're very caring and thoughtful. And also incredibly irritating when you want to be. But that is okay.
In the mornings.
Yes, in the morning. You are not a
morning person.
Definitely not a morning person, if you want to know that about Harlow. A bit of a night owl. I think you get that from your grandmother. And tell us now, Harlow, for those listening, some do know, one, because they watched my stories last year, that you... Well, darling, you went through a pretty major thing last year, and it was, for want of a better description, it was a bleed on your brain, but it's known as an AVM. So for anyone who is new to the story, can you tell us what is an AVM?
I've just forgotten how to pronounce it, but it's an arterial venous malformation.
There you go.
So it's when someone's blood vessels don't form correctly, typically along their spinal cord or in their brain, but it can form anywhere. it isn't inherited through genetics. It's just something you're born with. And
I was really surprised to learn that people can have them their whole life and have no problems,
Yeah.
but they can also rupture, because it's kind of like superhighways into little streets, isn't it? And little streets back into superhighways. So it's about slowing blood flow down and opening it up. And if it's not quite the right balance, and again, this is very layman's terms for the doctors out there, but it's easiest, then it can rupture, right?
Yes.
And so what's the percentage of rupture?
So only less than 0.1% of people have an AVM, and of that, they only have a 2% chance of it ever rupturing during their life. But after it ruptures once, there's a higher chance that it will rupture again as the years go on.
Yes. And so you had your AVM rupture, and that occurred last year in February.
Early February.
In like the first week of school or the second week of school?
The third day of school.
Yes, third day of school. So why don't you tell the listeners what that actually was like for you, having this rupture? How did it occur?
So it started with, I had swimming that day as a class, and my friends were like, oh, there's a swimming carnival after school, do you want to tag along? And I was like, sure, okay, yeah, it will earn house points for my school. And then I started overthinking it and becoming anxious, and as the day went on, my ears started ringing, and I would black out for a couple seconds and would see spots, but I didn't think anything of it. And then we got there to the swimming carnival. I started getting a headache, but I called my dad and told him, and he was like, oh, it's okay, just breathe. And then as I stood up to go to jump into the pool, it started feeling like someone was stabbing the side of my brain with a hot knife or a wrecking ball or something inside my brain. And I told my friend, my head really hurts, and she said, oh, it's okay, we'll get you like something after you get out. So I jumped into the pool, swam. After looking back, I've seen footage. It was not a good swim. It was highly embarrassing. But at that point, I was so not in control of my body that my friend had to drag me out of the pool at the end and walk me to go sit down somewhere.
You had lost...
I had lost control of my body.
Yeah, your legs weren't working. Yep.
I then told a teacher that I was in pain, and
and you vomited, I think, too.
And then I vomited. They called my dad. Originally, everyone just thought it was a migraine. So I spent the next couple days at home with like cold rags over my head, sleeping and barely in consciousness. And then we got a home doctor to come, and they told everyone that it was still a migraine unless it didn't go away in a couple days. And then I think this happened on the Tuesday, and then by Friday I still wasn't better. And
you're very listless.
And the entire family was taking a trip. This is at Dad's house. The entire family was taking a trip to the Gold Coast. So I went along lying in the back seat, and apparently I was making really weird comments and wasn't acting like myself, and then I peed my pants, and that was really a sign to my family that I was not myself and I was not okay. So by that night, late in the night, my dad took me to the first hospital. It was busy. Took me to the second. It was a mental asylum. Took me to the third, and it was only when a doctor was doing a routine checkup of my eyes to check that I could follow. They realized I had a blind spot. So from there were a lot of tests, and they just found a big black spot on the scan. So they weren't sure what it was. They weren't sure if it was a tumor or if it was...
Yeah, you had so again, just to...
This is what I've been told.
That was your experience, and from what you've recalled yourself. And for me, because you were actually at your dad's the week that this occurred, so Harlow spends 50% of her time with her dad at his house, and then 50% with me. And your dad let me know that at the swimming carnival you had a migraine. And so the next day I said to him, how are you? And he said, well, she's still got the migraine. And I said, you need to get a doctor out, because as someone who has had migraines, I've never had one go beyond a few hours. They're intense for me. So I was a bit concerned. Oh no, poor Harlow's inherited my really chronic, migraines when they come, though I have not had one in many, many years until actually just this year. So when your father then said you were not still okay on Friday, and I was like, yeah, well, you really need to get
Alarm
this looked at. Yeah, it was not okay. He really commented that doctor did a great job, because he said it could have just been missed, because you couldn't, it was only that you couldn't see out of one eye out to the other side.
The far right.
And then he ordered the scan, and as soon as they saw the scan,
I was airlifted
you were
to
immediately airlifted
the Queensland Children's Hospital.
From the Gold Coast,
Yeah.
And that's, that was late at night, and you arrived
early
in the morning, yeah. And so I was actually up at Noosa on a teacher's course. I was training in a healing modality, actually, and it was in the morning, and I got the message, and your dad just was like, we don't know what it is, but could be a tumor, it could be, we don't know, but it's big, and it's on her brain. And so you were in the ICU when I came and saw you, and obviously we were all very, very concerned. And I do remember that one of the doctors at the hospital, I keep wanting to say Marta, but the Queensland Children's Hospital, she said, straight up that based on the scan and the size of the bleed and the location of the bleed, which is actually the biggest part for you really, that she was not expecting a patient that could talk or walk or any of those things. She said based on the scan, just straight up scan, you'd be expecting a non-communicating, unable to walk.
Because my bleed was directly putting pressure onto my the communication part of your brain, the cognitive part of your brain, the memory part of your brain, all that sort of stuff.
Yes, I mean, and this is what we've learned. We've learned a lot about AVMs in the last little bit, but you can have, an AVM on the right-hand side of the brain. And for those of you who aren't aware with the different spheres of the brain, hemispheres, the left side of the brain is the logical, the reasoning, I suppose the more linear cognition, and so it's important and relevant for our memory, for our vocabulary, for our word finding, for our comprehension. And Harlow's bleed happened to happen at the superhighway intersection point, deep behind,
and a little bit of vision as well.
Yeah,
that was
deep behind where your eyes and your mouth and your cognition and memory all
work together.
So it was a pretty, that's one of the reasons she stayed so long in hospital the first time, because of the location, because it was so critical to really the functioning of your brain, and your capacity to continue to learn. And so what was that like being airlifted? Do you remember any of that? Do you remember arriving at ICU?
I vaguely remember at the hospital where I was originally at, Dad and Baylor kept leaving, and I was like, what's going on? And then that must have been when they gave me hardcore painkillers. And then I remember going on the airlift and seeing myself in front of me talking to me. And it was like, you're going to be okay, it's all okay. So that was
trippy and also wonderful.
And then I remember looking out over some sort of, maybe the Brisbane River, someone was like, look at the view. And then I got taken off, it was really cold, and then I remember maybe 4 people lifting me up of something onto another thing, and I was freaking out. I had no idea what was going on because none of my family was there. Dad and everyone was still driving up, like
I was driving down,
and you were driving down. Everyone was far away, and I felt alone.
But I will say, and I'm sure you'd agree, that the nurses and the doctors and the surgeons, amazing. Like, we have only the highest level of praise for them. And so basically, without wanting to tell the rest of your story, but just to move it along, because it has many segments, that you stayed a while in the ICU. From there you went through different wards into different wards.
Rehab.
And we were in the hospital that first time for
3.5
almost 4 weeks. Yeah. And that was because what they were waiting for was the bleeding and the swelling to go down so they could establish what had actually happened, which involved a lot of scans, a lot of MRIs, functional MRIs. There was a lot of testing. Yeah, they were not your favorites, I know. No. Long MRIs are really tough, and it's also a really intense machine for anyone who's ever had it. And you had some that
I had an hour-long one, and I accidentally asked them to have Mum be in the room with me.
That was not fun. No.
So Mum was sitting at the end of the machine with this horrible noise. Yes.
It wasn't like a rave though, although that just sounded like it when I made that noise. But anyway, we got through it, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
We got through it. And what was interesting is that I suppose the learning for me in that moment, and I'm sure this was something for you, but the learning for me was that there really is nothing more important or a bigger priority than your family and their health. And it's so cliched, but as someone who is notoriously, quote unquote, finger quotes here, busy, or has a full life, it's amazing how how
It stops.
rapidly empty I made my reality so that I could be 24/7 in the hospital with you, and just how easy that was, because it wasn't what's the word? It wasn't like I was trying to balance different needs and different priorities. It was like there is only one priority, boom, and everything just got cleared. So that was an interesting learning for me, and also just how much support I had, you know, through the community that we have in this household, because it did take support, because I did have your daughter as well, my other daughter, Bayla. So Harlow, you know, being in the hospital that first round, because the first round you didn't have surgery, it was just a waiting game.
Yeah.
But it was also, as you came out of really being out of it, there was a period of time there when you were going through rehab and you couldn't read words. And as someone who reads as much as you, can you share what that experience was like?
It was so frustrating. I would go to be with my speech therapist who would help me speak better, read better. And I actually remember one session I had with her when you weren't there, Mum. I actually just burst into tears, because she was like, come on, you can read this. And it was specifically a passage about the Eiffel Tower, and I just kept getting stuck on so many words. I could look at the word and I could recognize it, but I couldn't make my brain communicate with my mouth for what it was pronounced like. And it was so irritating. It was so irritating.
I remember that we talked at that time about how when I was a young girl, my neighbour had a stroke, and she was a very healthy, amazing, beautiful lady, and she had a stroke. And I remember my mum telling me at the time that the way strokes work is that the brain, they can still in their mind be thinking and really seeing the world, but it's that they can't communicate it, and so it's an incredibly frustrating thing. And so when I saw you going through that, it reminded me of that, and also how grateful I was that it was occurring to you at the age it was, because one of the things everyone did remind us of, and as we know through science, particularly in children, the brain is plastic anyway, but it's especially plastic in children. And what was amazing, even in the time frame between your original scans and then, so we ended up leaving hospital. We'll finish the story, but I just want to kind of give the time lag. We left hospital. We did a lot of rehab at home, which was a whole other kettle of fish. And maybe a couple months later, you had to go back for surgery, which required that they do more scans so they knew exactly what was happening. But the point I want to make right now is that from scan 1 to those other scans, when they were doing functional MRIs, which means they're asking your brain to do something and they're taking
so they can
photographs
see what's
in real time,
firing.
what's firing, exactly. And, you know, later when they showed us that parts of Harlow's brain that weren't working on the left to recall memory or do cognition of words or language, her language centers suddenly started firing in different parts of the brain on the right. And it was amazing, because it reminded me of, you know, what I know through my work, that the capacity of the system and the body to achieve things when it's required to go different routes, it will. And new neural pathways are able to be created. So I thought that was fascinating. But yes, we did a lot of tests, and then we ended up having to leave hospital because they didn't want to, they had decided that you did need to be operated on, and they decided that for a couple of reasons. One, because you'd already had a bleed, and as you pointed out in the intro, if you've had a bleed, you've got a greater percentage chance, and every year that chance increases again. So the risk we were running was that you could be
since
in your
I was
20s.
so young, if you were 80, they said if I was 80 they would leave it, because I'd already lived my life. But since I was so young, there were so many years where the percentage would get higher and higher that it would bleed again. They didn't want to take that risk.
Yes, and because where you could bleed was so
detrimental.
So major. Because if you'd had it, and we did meet other people in the hospital who had bleeds on the right-hand side of the brain, and it wasn't, nothing really got majorly affected. And having said that, we're very blessed, because it could have been way worse for you. You could have lost motor function. You could have lost your vision completely. They were concerned about that initially, because it slowly came back, is the point. So then we came home, and that was an interesting experience doing rehab at home, because we were now giving you all the drugs that they were giving you from home.
I still wasn't going to school.
You weren't going to school, no.
But at the time, school made it seem like I would be going back sooner. So I was like, it's like almost every week I would be like, oh, I'll be back on Monday. And then they'd push it back a little bit. So I felt I almost felt disappointed week after week that I wasn't going back and I was falling behind more.
Yes. And then, of course, we eventually got a date, but then that got pushed and then we got another date. And so we did have an operation. How did you feel going into, major brain surgery, really?
I felt okay. I was nervous, but I also knew that whatever happened would happen. I would be okay no matter what, as long as I survived. But I was going to survive. But there were also, I do remember having a conversation with one of my friends, and I remember telling them that I was anxious about surgery, and they were very dismissive of it, and it made me, and I think they were trying to not make it a big deal so I wasn't more anxious, but it made me feel belittled and more anxious.
Yeah, well, it is a big deal, and it's okay to recognize it's a big deal. And that day was particularly a big deal for me because, as you know, as any parent, I'm sure, who's ever had to take their child into major surgery and have them go under, knowing that they're about to have a major part of their brain literally opened up and removed and clips and things put in there, it's very terrifying and it's very powerless, and it's an undesirable. It's a suboptimal.
Thanks, Gabs.
Gabby would say it's a suboptimal experience. In fact, it's really truly you have to surrender to the grace of whatever you believe, right? And they did tell us that it would be. They couldn't say for sure, but 2 to 2.5 hours, give or take. And I remember I sat in that hospital. It was a Friday, and it closed. Like, I didn't realize this about hospitals till we spent so much time in them. They are kind of like Monday to Friday business hours operation centers, except for emergency.
No COVID on the weekends.
Like, I didn't really notice that. I didn't know that about hospitals, that if you come in after 5, there's no one around, and that there's no one there on the weekends. So anyway, on Friday afternoon, they just shut up shop. They'd taken you in, and I was like, there was no information. And we got to like 4 hours, there was no information. We got to like 5 hours, there was no information. And I am more than happy to admit that in that last hour or so, because I think it was just over 6 hours that you were in surgery, I absolutely dropped into some pretty dark fears there. Why have they not communicated? What's gone wrong? My brain just started to create all kinds of wonderful stories. And I'm very grateful to Alicia for being with me in that time. But the good news is you did come through the operation.
Yes.
And even though they wanted to see me before I went and saw you, and I still remember they were sort of saying things like, well, it was still the right decision for us to operate, and we did the best we could. And I was like, what the fuck has gone down? Excuse me.
They're about to tell me she's dead.
Well, not that, because they obviously would have led with that. Because I straight away said, is she okay? And they were like, yes, it went great. But then it was just a very weird post-op. They were probably exhausted.
Side note of what we've learned in hospital, that they always go very worst case scenario. Ophthalmology.
Yeah. They do.
They told me I would never drive.
They conserve. That's true.
I was 12.
Anyway, it was intense at the time. But the good news is you can. And I will just share this, that I remember they were saying to me, listen, don't expect much. She might be nonverbal for 4 days, a week. We just can't say. It's major surgery. We just have to wait and see. But we did the right thing to go in, and we think we did a great job. And I remember being like, oh my God, what has happened? And so we went into ICU to see you, and you really did look a sight at that time. You were covered in what I thought was blood, but was actually a lot of the
what is it called? Antiseptic dye?
Dyes, yeah. And your head was bound, and anyway, you looked very fragile and really like a patient. And I remember, coming in and speaking to you softly, and you responded verbally. You said, "Mummy," and I remember my heart just exploded, because I was like, she can hear me and she can respond. And then you said, "Mummy, my head hurts," and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. She's aware. And then you said, "Mummy, I need to pee," and I was like, and they said, "Oh yes, because you had a catheter."
Pee tube. Oh.
Yeah, in there, like a anyway.
Balloon.
Yes, and I remember just in that moment, just chills of gratitude, because I thought, not only can she communicate, which they didn't think you'd be able to do, but you were aware of your bodily senses, and it was just this oh, we're going to be fine. I just knew we were
Euphoric.
going to be fine. Yeah, it was so over the moon. And then you were quite chatty, and they couldn't even believe it. They were like, and I was like, well, this is my child. She can't talk underwater. But you were so chatty. And I have to say, your recovery post-operation was off the charts. They were like, this is ridiculous. And they said you'd be in ICU for maybe even a week, and you were, I think, out in 2 days. We were out of hospital within a week.
4 days. Remember they kept me because I got a fever?
Yeah. Actually, well, yeah, they were talking. They wanted to have you out of ICU.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. And then, but we were out of the hospital within a week. We got booted out pretty quick.
Yep.
And we were like, what? Are you sure? And though the upside of that is that you healed very quickly. And that was just such a blessing. And your surgery, even in the months since that, did go so well. So we had, all in all, even though it was a very, a rough journey at times, you've had the best possible outcome imaginable, and we cannot speak highly enough of the medical professionals and your surgeon and the amazing team at the Queensland Children's Hospital. They're phenomenal, truly phenomenal. Honestly, they're just angels. And so what I wanted to touch on, Harlow, is not so much, the story of your brain surgery and the AVM, but the ripple effect, because, that all happened, by mid-May, end of May, you were technically out of hospital, but you really didn't go back to school, well, even by the end of the year.
Late
properly.
June, I was going back so a quarter of a day, 1 hour and 10 minutes. Yeah. And then it started building and building. My first day when I went back, it was like something from a movie. I walked in, my friends saw me in the courtyard, they all ran up to me, and I had hugs, and I walked into class and everyone's like, Harlow, you're back. And then they knew the teachers and I didn't. They had new inside jokes I didn't know. And then I left, and they had another class, and then lunch, and then 2 other classes together.
You were kind of like this visitor that would drop in occasionally.
Yeah, drop in occasionally. That literally multiple times I was told, oh my gosh, we forgot you went here. We forgot you were in our class.
Which is,
not something you say to someone.
Well, but they didn't mean it like that.
I
but
know.
It would have felt very, how did it feel?
Isolated.
Yeah. And so this is the thing that we wanted to really touch on, is the learnings that you've had as a result of the experience that you've been through, because everybody goes through stuff. Everyone's gone through stuff. Certainly if Harlow, you had it happen at 12. And, I work with a lot of adults in my coaching work who have had, major incidents in their childhood. But if you haven't had it in your childhood at some point, for me, it happened later in life, divorce, near bankruptcies, business stuff, heartbreaks, all of those things. And we get through it is the thing. Like at the time,
survive.
At the time, yeah, we survive. We're like, yes, we did it. Yes, we got the ball back over the fence. We, returned the shot, so to speak. But what we sometimes don't realize is that we are forever, in a way, changed and edited and evolved as a result of that experience. And that as we're going through one pathway, the rest of life is going through another. And that was your biggest kind of aha, wasn't it, darling? That you were in hospital having this experience, seeing specialists, going through rehab, being grateful that you could read a basic book, being grateful that you could watch something, and then
keep my eyes open.
Yeah, keep your eyes open for an extended period of time. So what was it like going back?
The first 2 weeks, I really tried my hardest to care about the things that this sounds very, not great. I really tried my hardest to care about the school dance that was coming up, or the teacher getting a goldfish, but I really didn't, because I was still going home, I was still in pain, I was still moving through things. I was just on a different path than everyone else. And by the 3rd week of school that I was back, I was going back half time, and there was a school dance coming up at the end of the week, but I had it wasn't a follow-up surgery for my brain, but it was a follow-up surgery through my blood vessels. And I was anxious for that coming up, whereas all my friends were chatting about what they'd wear to the school dance. And that was really the biggest sign for me that there was a massive disconnect. And it just wasn't me anymore. I mean, I'm not sure if it ever was me, but I couldn't relate as much as I used to be able to.
Would you say that your priorities just got shifted, or that your focus was so different?
My priorities just got shifted. I didn't care about that right at that moment.
Which, at your age might at the time feel like a disconnect, but for a lot of adults listening, there is so much that we worry about in high school that's really not worth the worry. When we look back, we're like, why did we stress so much about that? And so there is some blessings in that, to have that so powerfully, and I'm sure at times painfully, continually delivered to you, and I know it was. And
absolutely. But
and
then
that was tough.
I would come home and they'd still be at school and they'd still be making new friends. There'd be new people I didn't know, or group chats I wasn't in, or just things I was missing out on. And I didn't care, but a part of me did. A part of me wanted to belong with that group. A part of me wanted to feel a part of something, a basic human need. But it really helped me realize that I was a part of something. My family, my best friend, I didn't need to have the deepest, most meaningful connection with people that I got along with, but they weren't my people. And that's okay.
Yeah, and I think, to take this as a lesson for other people, where else have we all done that, right? Where we're really actually either all consumed in something and we're trying to give more of ourselves to something that isn't a priority, or we've just diverged in a different direction perhaps, and yet we're still trying to keep alive or put time and energy into a section of society that it's just okay to let it go. That it doesn't add to our lives, and it depletes us in an attempt to constantly try and keep it either alive or resurrected. And that was kind of the realization you came to, wasn't it? Yeah. And so then the other major learning and aha you had was a pretty major one around your identity. And the reason I wanted to share this is because I can honestly say that if most adults could come to the same level of self-awareness that you have through challenges like this, instead of being like, I survived it, and then repressing all their stuff, instead of looking at their patterns as they're working back towards, normalcy, quote unquote, and also choosing, instead of just rebuilding what they had, to really course correct into what's more aligned, like you've taken the time to do, the world would be so much more healed and higher in its consciousness. So share in whatever way feels right for you, hun, about your...
I'm not entirely sure where to start, but as I was going back to school, I was only there for one lesson, and I knew that I wasn't being assessed, but I still felt like I had to achieve something, I had to do something, I had to prove myself that I was okay and that I was back.
Well, why did you have to do that, do you think? Because
then I'd get validation.
Yes, because why is that important for you in particular?
Because that is how I identify myself as a smart, high achiever.
Yeah. So, Harlow has often been aware, and we've, in our family, we lovingly like to point out everyone's patterns. We're not shy about that in our household, are we? But what's one of the things that you definitely identify with, because you are, is, you've been school captain in primary school, you've been a straight A student, you made, you got entry into your high school due to academic excellence. So, you are a very smart individual. You're in a group of people that are, whatever they're called, an Aspire group. So, you're in a group of school, what do you call it? You're in a class.
Accelerated class.
An accelerated class, thank you. I'm not in that class, not meant to be in that class, because I can't even think of that word. But the point is that there's a lot of things that were contextually framing you with this identity, and so you've now had a brain bleed, right? And couldn't read some basic words for a while there, literally couldn't do things, couldn't read out loud, couldn't actually even spend time reading. And then you're going back to school, and you're really hit with this, what would you call it?
Who am I if I'm not who I am? Who if I am and I'm not smart?
And, in coaching, we call that, it's what we call identity coherence. We want to be who we know we are. And if we can't be who we know we are, then it's almost like a death. And, the same way most people relate to death is generally anxiety, fear, stress, worry. So, you went through some anxiety, you would stress about
I would stress about doing the assignment that no one except for me was requiring me to do, except for one teacher. No one was expecting anything of me except for myself, and I was putting so much pressure on myself that it was actually causing more ripple effects of physical pain. I was getting actual migraines. I was losing my vision due to anxiety. Which would mean I would have to leave school and fall back even further and be at school less and cause more anxiety. It's just a vicious cycle.
It was, I mean, I'm smiling. It was a little bit ironic, wasn't it? Because you'd get yourself worked up and you say, Mum, I need to come home, I got a headache. And I was like, I knew that day you were already stressing yourself out because there was an assignment. I was like, and I'd be like, honey, it's challenging for me as your mother and someone who is aware of many of your patterns to see it, but would you agree, until you can see it yourself, you don't, someone can say, honey, you're stressing yourself out about this, and you'd be like, I'm not stressing myself out about it, it's important, like, because you're in it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm saying this, I'm sharing this not for you, because we've been through this, but for the listeners, is, people can often reflect to you patterns that need work, and you'll be like, no, you don't understand, because you're in it, you're so committed to it, you're so in survival of it being right, that you will fight for it. But over time, you really gained an ability to reflect on it.
Well, I think it was when I started to realize, when the first time that anything bad happened, not bad, but anything happened out of the ordinary, was I was at school, and it was actually meant to be my first day of full school. And I was in my second class of the day with my favorite teacher, and I started to lose vision, and black spots were everywhere, and I let my teacher know, and obviously then she started freaking out, and everyone started freaking out, and everyone was freaking out, and I was freaking out, and then they sent me home, and then I was freaking out, and everyone was freaking out, and I got better, but that's when I realized, interesting that it was meant to be on the day where I was meant to do a full day.
Yes.
Like I hadn't been in that much pain for months.
Yeah, you hadn't been, exactly. You would almost create, and this is actually a really important point, because a lot of people don't like to hear this, and yet I've had many guests, experts on this very podcast, and we definitely tap into it in different aspects of the School of Growth, but our psychology massively affects our physiology. You are the placebo. If you think that the pill is making you better, it's going to make you better. If you think you're going to get sick because someone coughed on you, you can make yourself sick. We know this. You have the capacity to heal or harm yourself based on your beliefs around it. And so if you subconsciously are like, oh my gosh, I have to perform, oh my gosh, it's almost like this pressure. And this is actually how we started to unpack it, was this realization that to actually perform and succeed, Harlow realized she had kind of coded, or what we call fired and wired, the need for extreme stress.
With success.
Yeah, extreme. Oh, there you go. Extreme success and stress together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it really was. And when you unpacked it, I remember when I kind of just very gently said, well, it sounds like this. You were like, you kind of were like, oh my God.
And then you said, what if you found a way to succeed and perform and be chill? And I broke into hysterical laughter.
Yes, you did.
I did not understand.
You were like, that just doesn't even, that reality, what crazy talk are you speaking of, woman?
Yeah.
You were like, that, what is this craziness?
Witchcraft.
Yeah, it was, because we kind of just mapped it out really basically, didn't we? And it's important to actually, if you're listening, to notice that we all have what's technically called collapsed domains. So Harlow had the domain of success and the domain of stress collapsed together.
And laziness.
Yes, and then laziness
and chill
like are one
relaxed
thing. So if she's relaxed, she does absolutely nothing, and it's got she can only relax, like you do relax. You have the ability to relax, just so people are aware, but it's when she's relaxing, it's got nothing to do with any performance orientated stuff, like you're like a sloppy.
Not even relaxed wouldn't even be the word, just chill, not stressed.
Yeah. And that's that to you was coded as lazy. And so she allows herself to be lazy, and you identify as lazy as well, like when it comes to certain things like reading and staying in bed. But then when it was to do with anything performance-based, it was
going
like this
to school.
Immediately kicked into like, oh, I got to be stressed about it.
Got to get to school on time.
Yeah, I got to do that. And we're like, but do we? And yeah, it was interesting. So that was a great, and as I'm sure you would happily admit, we haven't mastered the solution yet. But as I point out to my clients, and I'll reiterate here for everyone listening, is without awareness, you cannot access an ascended pathway. You must first see the craziness of the choices and the patterning that you've been living by, and lovingly go, oh, I see it. Oh, I see it again. Oh, wow, there it is again. To be able to. And, Hals, you're 13. So, if everyone can do this work at 13, gosh, where you're going to be, it just makes me very happy, is the point. So yeah, big learnings in a big year, huh? Mm-hmm. And so you didn't really get a lot of school in last year, but now you're moving. Like you didn't. I mean, how many days did you go to out of a whole year? It wasn't many.
That is not fair. I went to 24 full days of school out of 200. But a lot of days I did like half days or 3/4 days. And then the first half of the year I wasn't even there.
No, I know. That's
and
I
argue that I learned everything that needed to be learned, and that just shows how corrupt the school system is.
Well, how repetitive and benign potentially.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the thing, both of your parents aren't overly attached to the academic system, so that is helpful. We're probably a little too chill on that side of things, and you tend to be like, come on, I want to get to school. And we're like, it's okay.
I remember when Dad forced me to stay home because I was like going into there was probably a week when I was at Dad's. I don't know if I fully told you about it, but I was like in such high stress that I wasn't falling asleep till 4 a.m. in the morning, and then I was waking up at 6 before my alarm went off. And then Dad kept me home for the last 3 days of school, which only at that time stressed me out more because there was a science thing happening. And then my teachers ended up emailing me, not to even put pressure on me, to say, it's all good, how are you going? Like, take as much time off as you need. We never expected you to do this thing. And I still felt like I needed to do it.
You can even hear as Harlow reshares that, just the energy of the frequency of it, right?
Yeah.
You can feel the stress, right? Yes, and I think that, anyway, the point that we're really trying to drive home is, in that particular learning for you, it was that the external world was expecting nothing from you, because your dad and I had done the work to communicate to the teachers, and the hospital had communicated to the school, you cannot assess this girl. She has had major brain surgery. She is in rehabilitation. She does not need the pressure, nor will it serve her to have to be graded. She's going back to school really for re-socialization and just to feel like, well, a return to school, right? Like an on-ramp over time. And so it was really only you that was wigging yourself out. And ironically, because you are really smart, some things you would do the assessments and still get 98% and A pluses and stuff in. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous and unnecessary. But the point is you are smart. But it was an interesting year, I hope, for you to learn that whilst you're smart, you're also so much more than that. And for those listening, if Harlow only believed that she was valuable because she was smart, which I think a part of you probably used to, and then let's say this brain injury had a longer term effect, well then, gosh, that doesn't set her up for a overly exciting, thriving, happy life.
It's not ideal when you how do I phrase this? It's not ideal when you see value in yourself through your intelligence and then have an inability
to use your intelligence.
Intelligence.
Well, and this is my point exactly. So where else do you as a listener and me as a woman and all of us collectively, where do we over-identify as something, and therefore when we maybe drop the ball in that area or we're no longer even excited about that thing, it's like this identity coherence that Harlow went through. It's like, well, if I'm not that, then what the heck am I? Which is why obviously I'm so passionate about wholeness, because if we can be in the reality of I'm really intelligent and I'm really funny and I'm really creative and yes, and Harlow gets it all day long, but it's a really valuable lesson for all of us to remember that we are so much more than any one aspect of ourselves, even though we may very much be that thing. Very deeply and very truly. It's not saying that it's not authentic. She's incredibly smart, ridiculously smart, but she's also more than that. So, Harls, what would you say to anyone who's going through a health crisis or a tough time right now? Like, what would just from your heart to theirs, what would you say?
Mentally, what would I say?
Whatever. Start wherever, darling.
I would say, make sure you surround yourself with people that love you and are there for you unconditionally and have good energy.
I think that would be really good advice.
Yeah. I would also say, drink Kangen water.
Drink quality water.
Drink good water. Hold out faith.
Yeah, good thoughts.
And pain is only temporary. And it always serves a purpose. You're always going to learn something. Yeah.
Very wise words. I thought you were going to say, and listen to Brooklyn Nine-Nine on repeat.
I know every single word of... We forgot to say that in the intro. Obsessed with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, guys.
We're obsessed with a lot of different shows.
I get really into things, yeah.
Yeah, you do. and you are a Brooklyn Nine-Nine fan through and through.
Through
For good
and
reason.
through.
It's a great show.
If you ever need book recommendations, TV show recommendations, come to me.
Well, if you like
DM Mum.
teen romance.
I watched some good ones.
Oh, gosh.
Manifest.
Yes. Okay, so that's great advice, honey. And then what would you say to kids out there in high school or in primary school who are struggling a little to find their group, their crew, they just don't feel like they fit in? What would you say to
I
them?
would say definitely don't change yourself to fit in. It's, what's that saying? It's that you don't wear the jeans, the jeans don't wear you, you wear the jeans. So don't go and try fit into another group. Find a group that you fit into naturally. And it doesn't have to happen immediately. Don't go to the most convenient people, because over time it will happen naturally. So for the meantime, be happy with the other friends you have. Be happy with your family. Be happy with yourself.
I think that's really good advice, because it's an interesting paradox that often we feel lonely and we're afraid of feeling lonely and left out. So
I
we
felt lonely.
squeeze ourselves in, But if you squeeze yourself into a community that doesn't allow you to be yourself,
The real you
or that
does
you
feel lonely.
won't allow yourself to be your real self, because that you don't feel that version of you, your authentic self,
Would be
is loved or acknowledged or accepted or even allowed, well, then you've abandoned yourself, and therefore you will always forever be alone and feel scared or unseen and all of those things. So it's a bit of a paradox. Sometimes in our attempt for that approval and that praise, we're abandoning ourselves, which means even if we get it, we won't really feel it, because you left yourself behind in the process. So great advice, my love. And a different type of episode today, but I hope that in sharing Harlow's story, that you gain something for yourself, because we all journey through our own challenges in life. And, a big belief we have in this family is that everything happens for a reason, and that
Absolutely.
things always work out in your best and highest eventually, and that everything is a lesson, a learning, and a gift if you choose to view it that way.
Even if it doesn't feel like that during the process.
It very often does not feel like that in the process. I can attest to that 100%, but you are quite right, my love. I love you very much.
Thank you.
I will say one of the things that I am most grateful for from the experience is that you are still you, that you are still my quirky Harlow, that you are still a bit crazy.
A little bit.
And that we have you with your beautiful idiosyncrasies, because the brain is like this, and we know people in real life who have had friends and family members have brain injuries, and whilst they're alive, which is wonderful,
They're not there.
They're not themselves. And my biggest fear, and the thing I just kept saying, is we can deal with everything, but just allow my Harlow to be still Harlow. Just have her be Harlow. Don't lose her beautiful personality. And so I'm so grateful that happened. And of course, beyond blessed and grateful that you had amazing outcomes, that your recovery was phenomenal. And it's still ongoing. I know that you admit we're still not there yet. And if you never get there, though, if this is the new baseline,
I'm doing better than I was
you're
before.
Fine. You're totally fine.
Thank you so much for having me. So next episode I'm on, we'll do a deep dive into Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Okay.
You let us know if you want that.
Okay. You let Harlow know if you want a deep dive into Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
At Harlow Perry.
Okay. Done.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for being on the show, honey. Love you.